My name is Grace Holloway. The day I walked into court, he looked at me like I was nothing. My ex-husband, Nathan Whitmore, a successful attorney from a prestigious family, sat there with a smug smile, convinced this divorce was just a formality to claim whatever was left of me. What he didn't know was the judge was holding a folder I had submitted that very morning. A folder that would shatter every assumption, every performance he'd spent the past 3 years carefully staging. Have you ever been underestimated so deeply that someone truly believed you'd never dare to fight back? If this story speaks to you, like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, because right now, I'm going to tell you how an ordinary teacher was turned into a pawn, and then stood up to flip the entire board. I met Nathan one early autumn afternoon when the air in Denver turned crisp and the leaves started to yellow along the sidewalks. I hadn't planned on attending the seminar and education law forum hosted by the district, but my colleague Jenna was excited. She said, "Come on, maybe you'll find something to inspire your students." I tagged along reluctantly, notebook in hand, ready to zone out. Nathan took the stage midway through the program. He didn't need to tap the mic or give an intro. The room, nearly 100 people, fell silent the moment he spoke, calm, warm, assured. My eyes scanned the screen for his name. Nathan Whitmore, founding partner Whitmore and Finch LLP, one of Colorado's top-ranked law firms, featured in Forbes Local's top under 35 lawyers to watch. I remember whispering to Jenna, "The kind of guy who walks into a room and the noise disappears," she giggled. I didn't know then that Nathan had been scanning the crowd and his eyes had stopped on me. After the seminar, we bumped into each other at the coffee bar. I was struggling to get the lid on my cup when he walked up and smiled. "Let me guess, teacher?" I blinked. "How'd you know?" He shrugged. "The way you take notes, the way you tilt your head when you listen, reminds me of my high school teacher." That simple comment led to a conversation that lasted nearly an hour. Nathan asked about my students, about American history, about whether I thought kids today misunderstood the past. I remember talking passionately, something I rarely did with strangers. When I paused, a little embarrassed for rambling, he smiled and said, "I like the way you see history as real people, not dates and wars." After that he texted, then coffee dates, then long evenings at the bookstore, morning messages that read, "Have a great day, my favorite history prof," and bouquets left at the teacher's lounge door. I used to think, I don't belong in his world. He lived in a Highlands estate. I rented a run-down apartment near the tracks. But Nathan never made me feel small. He said, "I have a whole house, but you're the warmth I want to come home to." 6 months later, he knelt in the middle of the school courtyard right after graduation, under the stunned gaze of my students and coworkers. A small ring, dazzling enough to catch the sun, sat in his open palm. "I don't want you to teach history," he said. "I want us to write a future." I cried, I nodded, Jenna screamed with excitement, and I, a simple history teacher, believed I'd stepped into a fairy tale. After the wedding, life felt like a dream. I moved into his home, exposed brick walls, a real fireplace, a piano his mother used to play. He bought me a new car because you can't show up to school in that lawnmower on wheels. "I stopped teaching," Nathan said. "You've given enough to your students, it's time to live for yourself." I started learning to cook, trying flower arranging, attending charity luncheons his mother hosted. Everywhere I went, I was introduced as Grace Pregnant, Nathan Whitmore's wife. People smiled politely, but their eyes were always curious, as if trying to figure out why someone like him had chosen someone like me. But I thought maybe it was just my own insecurity. Nathan was always sweet in public. He used to joke to friends, "Grace is the only one who can get me to put down my phone." They'd chuckle, I'd blush, he'd squeeze my hand under the table. But slowly, the teasing turned sharper. "You really do ask the cutest little naive questions. Why are you reading financial reports? You don't need to worry about that stuff. This party's all lawyers, just smile politely and don't ask anything awkward, okay?" I kept reminding myself successful men are busy. A little controlling is normal. As long as he loves me, but maybe I'd misunderstood everything from the very first line of this story. Because all the sweetness in the beginning was the first draft of a contract I never knew I was being coaxed to sign. Once I officially became Mrs. Nathan Whitmore, the world around me changed color. I was no longer the high school history teacher. I was Mrs. Whitmore, front row at fundraisers, name printed on invitations to exclusive business galas in Denver, described by local media as graceful, polished, and perfectly matched to a man of Nathan's stature. At first it felt strange, but not bad. I told myself I was simply adjusting to a new life. During our honeymoon in Napa, Nathan said, "You don't need to go back to school. You've done your part for those kids. Now's your time to breathe, to sleep past 6 a.m. for once." I laughed. I thought it was a privilege. Then he added, "Aren't you lucky? You've spent your life working for others. Let me take care of you now." Back then, I thought that was love. We opened a joint bank account. Nathan said it would be easier to manage. He handed me a supplementary card, but all major transactions had to be approved via his phone. He said it was a bank security measure. And I believed him. At first, I didn't mind. I wasn't a big shopper. I didn't care for luxury brands. But when I tried to enroll in an online creative writing course, Nathan blocked it. "What do you need that for? Planning to publish a novel?" He smiled faintly, but his eyes weren't soft anymore. I hesitated. "I just want something to do." "You could help my mom prep for the charity event. She said you're great at table setups." I tried to feel proud of being trusted with responsibilities, but deep down, I felt like I was becoming a woman I never chose to be. Day by day, I felt myself shrinking. Nathan stopped asking for my thoughts. He started giving polite commands. "We've got clients coming tonight. Don't wear that blue dress. It's a bit schoolgirl. You don't need to talk much at the party. Everyone there's in-law. You're still in touch with that teacher friend? She doesn't really get your life anymore." Each comment was like a pinprick. No blood, but over time, a wound I didn't know how to trace back to its start. One time, I told him I wanted to visit a former student's sister an art gallery opening she invited me to. Nathan looked up from his laptop. Not angry, not loud. Gently said, "Grace, do you really think showing up to a little gallery in East Denver is going to impress anyone? You're my wife, you can do better than that." I turned away, trying to hide the sudden blur in my eyes. Each morning I began waking up with a strange tightness in my chest, as if someone was building an invisible wall around me. There were no blatant insults, no bruises on my skin, but inside, I was wearing down. Every time I said I felt lonely, Nathan would wrap his arms around me and whisper, "I'm right here. What more could you need?" And I would blame myself. I have a successful husband, a beautiful house, no financial worries. So why am I sad? It must be my fault. But what blinded me wasn't the house or the sparkling ring. It was Nathan's subtle control. He never forced, he suggested. He protected me from trouble. He offered better options. And I, once a confident teacher who could engage even the most unruly students, stood in silence when the bank clerk asked him for approval, even though I was the one trying to withdraw money from our joint account. My friends slowly disappeared, not because I cut them off, but because every time we planned something, Nathan always had something more important that made me cancel. "You're still texting that black teacher from last year?" he once asked. "She doesn't fit in at legal functions, you should reconsider." And I slowly erased each contact, not because I wanted to let go of them, but because I began to believe they truly didn't belong in my new life. Looking back, I realized Nathan didn't trap me with walls or locks. He trapped me with gratitude, woven into gentle compliments that subtly reminded me I was lucky he chose me. And the worst part was, I believed it. I believed it so deeply that I started doubting myself. I thought I had nothing left to stand on if Nathan ever walked away. I didn't know when I lost myself. I only know that one morning I looked in the mirror and asked, "Who is this woman? And if I disappeared today, would anyone even notice?" I found the letter on a softly raining afternoon, when I decided to clean out the back storage room of the estate because there was simply nothing else to do. Nathan was away on a business trip and the house felt too large, too empty. I wandered from room to room until I stopped in front of the wooden door that led down to the basement. The key was still in the small kitchen drawer where he once said, "That's old stuff from my mom. You don't need to worry about it." I don't know why, but that day I felt this sudden pull to open it. Maybe I was searching for something to hold on to, something to keep myself from vanishing out of my own life. Old paper and rotting wood filled the space with a heavy scent. Large cardboard boxes were sealed with thick tape. I opened them one by one. Old books, wool scarves, faded photo frames, until I reached a small tin box wrapped in a deep purple velvet pouch. It wasn't locked, just needed a gentle twist. Inside was a yellowed envelope, corners curled with age. In delicate but firm violet ink, the handwritten words read, "To my daughter, Grace Eleanor Holloway." My heart pounded like someone was knocking from the inside of my chest. I had never heard that name before, but it rang with a bone-deep familiarity that chilled me. Hands trembling, I tore it open and pulled out 3 handwritten pages. "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this letter, it means the truth has finally found its way back to you. I am Eleanor Holloway. I never abandoned you. They took you from me and took me from you, but I always believed that one day you would know you were never just some nameless child. You were the only light I ever had." I dropped to the cold wooden floor, my eyes locked on the words, afraid that blinking might make it all vanish like a dream. I once trusted someone I loved, but love, when met with greed, becomes the cruelest thing. When I was pregnant with you, I chose to step away from business operations and create a private investment trust called the Holloway Legacy Trust. What I didn't foresee was that this decision would make me a threat to those who once called me partner. The accident happened 2 months after your birth. The media called it a plane crash, but I knew it was staged. Thankfully, a close friend of mine managed to get you out of the city, had your identity completely changed to protect you. But they couldn't reclaim custody, and you grew up not knowing who you were. I folded the letter, hands shaking so badly I could barely keep it in place. I was the biological daughter of a woman who once ran one of the most respected investment funds on the West Coast, a woman whose name I'd seen in old articles without ever connecting the dots. Eleanor Holloway, the name once tied to headline-making deals before she vanished in a plane crash in 1994. I felt like I was standing between 2 worlds. The one I'd lived in, small, tightly controlled, where I had to constantly prove I was worthy, and the one I had belonged to, but never knew. That night I drove to the city library. I combed through archived records, newspapers from 3 decades ago, articles about Eleanor, rumors about the crash. Then I found my first clue, a 1995 article stating that the Holloway Legacy Trust had been frozen because the legal heir was missing or unidentified. I read that line over and over again. I began searching for an attorney, not a divorce lawyer, but someone who understood trust law, asset protection, and most importantly, how a person with a hidden identity could reclaim a stolen inheritance. I found Harold Green, a retired attorney living in Santa Fe who had once worked with the Holloway Foundation before it was dissolved. I sent him a copy of the letter, a few old photos of me as a child, and asked, could I be the person they've been looking for? Harold didn't respond right away. A week later he called. "Miss Holloway, if everything you've told me is true, then not only are you the rightful heir to that $40 million trust, you may also have grounds to request a full investigation into the assets hidden after your mother's death." I didn't know what to say. I sat in silence for hours after that call, clutching the letter to my chest like I could finally touch the mother I'd never met. The question that haunted me wasn't, how much will I get? It was, if my mother sacrificed everything to protect my life, then do I have the courage now to truly live it and protect what she left behind? That night, the wind picked up. Tree branches tapped softly against the second-story window, blurring with the sound of my own breath. I was alone in my small study, the one Nathan said I could decorate however I want, as long as it doesn't look too cluttered with books. On the desk lay the Holloway Legacy Trust documents I had printed after hours of digging. Under the desk lamp the text looked faint, not because the ink was bad, but because my hands were shaking. I held a full cup of tea I hadn't touched, about to leave the room and head to bed, when I heard the front door open. Nathan was home. I glanced at the clock. Almost 1 a.m. He'd said he had a meeting with out-of-town clients and might not be home tonight. But there he was, downstairs, his shoes tapping lightly on the wooden floor, as if he didn't want anyone to know he was back. I stepped into the hallway, about to call out, but stopped when I saw the dim light glowing from the dining room. That was the spot we usually use to drop off files and personal things after a late night. Then I heard his voice. Low, quiet, but every word crystal clear. Or she doesn't know a thing. Grace still thinks she's a teacher who wandered into a rich man's world. Always grateful. I had the prenup amended into community property. She signed without reading it carefully. Once this is over, I'll have legal claim to the land that's in her name, the one she thinks isn't worth much. She still believes I married her out of love. A quiet laugh followed, colder than the wind outside. I pressed myself against the railing, my heart thudding like war drums inside my chest. Nathan's voice slowed, sharper now. Do you know what that land is actually worth? Untouched, right in the zone for the new renewable energy project out west. And she's naive enough not to realize her mother's trust once held major shares in the Geological Survey Company. I covered my mouth to keep my breathing silent. There was a pause. Then another chuckle from Nathan. Don't worry, Ashley, the plan's still on track. Once she signs those divorce papers, everything will be ours. My throat tightened like someone was squeezing it from the inside. I had to grab the wall to keep from collapsing. Ashley, my best friend from college, the woman who had slept over dozens of times, the one who cried in my arms during her second divorce, the one who once said, Nathan is a rare kind of blessing in your life. I backed away step by step, my legs feeling weightless. In my mind, memories shredded and rearranged themselves into one single horrifying truth. They had planned this together. I remembered last year's birthday party, when Ashley accidentally spilled wine on my blouse and insisted on helping me change upstairs, only to stay downstairs alone with Nathan far too long. I remembered the looks they gave each other, not overt, but subtle, calculated, wrapped in the cloak of coincidence. I had seen it, I had felt it, but I hadn't wanted to believe. Nathan's voice continued, she's too soft. All I had to do was play the attentive husband, then slowly steer the decisions. I didn't have to push, just nudge, and she did the rest. I returned to the bedroom, each step like stepping on broken glass. Every word he spoke cut like a blade. Not sharp, but slicing, deep, by making me feel like a fool. In the mirror, my face looked pale, eyes wide and frozen. I pressed a hand to my chest where my heart was pounding as if trying to escape my body. I opened the drawer, pulled out the Holloway Trust file and began writing a list. The name of the Geological Survey Company my mother once invested in. Parcel ID of the land under my name. The date of the prenuptial agreement and all amended documents. Ashley's name and every overnight visit she made. I wrote. No shaking, no hesitation. Because if others had written my story for me before, now I understood. I needed to take back the pen. I didn't react that night. Didn't call a lawyer. Didn't confront Nathan. I let him continue playing the doting husband, haha, while I quietly prepared for the final act. The next morning, I got up early as usual, made coffee, arranged pastries on white porcelain, and smiled as he walked into the kitchen, brushing a kiss against my cheek. Nathan never noticed that my eyes no longer looked the same. I began with a silent appointment. That evening, while Nathan was meeting a client, I took an Uber to a small law office in Capitol Hill. The woman I came to see was Sophia Langley, an independent attorney who used to work for a state succession advisory in Texas. She specialized in anonymous or lost assets linked to identity changes. Sophia was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and direct. I read your mother's letter. Every line of handwriting matches Eleanor Holloway's archived signatures. Do you realize this could unravel a trust that's been frozen since 1995? I didn't come to reclaim money, I said. I came to reclaim myself, and to stop a man who's been lying from taking anything else. Sophia narrowed her eyes as I laid out Nathan's entire divorce strategy. Do you have any proof? I have a voice recording, and I've kept logs of the times he altered legal documents. Then you'll need 3 things: an asset tracing expert, an investigative journalist, and a private investigator who knows when to stay silent. The first person I contacted was Caleb Monroe, a former investigative reporter from the Ledger, now freelancing. I found him through a niche forum on hidden inheritance cases. We met at a coffee shop near the public library. Caleb looked through the folder I brought, then glanced up. If you're right, your mother had indirect stakes in 3 mineral companies through intermediaries. If the Holloway Trust is still operating quietly through those arms, the asset value isn't just $40 million like the original documents say. So can you help me trace the active accounts? If you give me 2 weeks and access to preliminary financial records, I'll give you a complete map, including the ones Nathan's eyeing. But Caleb, this has to stay completely quiet. Ms. Holloway, he said with a faint grin, I once tracked a politician for 6 months, and his wife never suspected a thing. Trust me, I know how to keep things hidden. The third person I sought out was Marjorie Kane, a 60-something private investigator who used to be a homicide detective in Boulder. She retired after an accident, but still took cases that smelled like money and betrayal. She read my mother's letter, listened to the recording of Nathan, reviewed his message history with Ashley. As I waited in silence, bracing for her verdict, Marjorie asked one question. Do you want this evidence strong enough for court, or strong enough that he can't deny it even to himself? Both, I said, my voice no longer trembling like before. She nodded. I'll tell Ashley, let them think they still hold all the cards. In the weeks that followed, I lived like a woman with 2 faces. By day, I attended my mother-in-law's cocktail parties, sat beside Nathan at client dinners, smiled at Ashley when she stopped by. By night, I read Caleb's updates about anonymous shares, foreign accounts my mother once opened. I signed legal authorization with Sophia to petition the federal court in Denver to reopen Eleanor Holloway's inheritance file. I reread the prenuptial agreement Nathan had me sign 3 years ago, and spotted the amendments, cleverly buried in legal language, clauses that, had I not scrutinized, would have gone unnoticed as transferring my mother's land into marital property. I marked every section, logged every date he asked me to sign, and I knew Nathan had found out. Maybe not from the very beginning, but early enough to plot. The more I read, the colder the fury that crept into my blood, not because I was betrayed, but because I was underestimated. He thought I wasn't smart enough to read the fine print, thought I wasn't alert enough to catch the way he spoke to Ashley. So I began gathering every broken piece to rebuild the truth. Courtroom 4 at the Denver County Courthouse was unusually crowded that morning. No reporters, no media cameras, but every seat in the gallery was filled. Partly because of Nathan Whitmore's reputation, and partly because people could sense this wasn't going to be a typical divorce hearing. I sat upright at the table on the right, wearing a light gray suit, not the soft dresses from charity galas, not the designer blouse Nathan once picked for meetings with his legal peers. I chose this suit because it made me feel like myself. Nathan walked in 5 minutes after me. He was flanked by 2 attorneys, including Gerald Knox, a senior partner at the very firm Nathan had co-founded. He looked like he'd stepped off a magazine cover, tailored suit, silk tie perfectly knotted, posture firm with confidence. Nathan's gaze swept over me, calm, almost pitying. He pressed his lips together, nodded slightly as if to say, I'll make this as painless as possible. Presiding over the hearing was Judge Louise Merrick, known for her discipline, toughness, and zero tolerance for acid disputes. She began the session in a solemn voice. We are here today to resolve the divorce between the petitioner, Mrs. Grace Whitmore, and the respondent, Mr. Nathan Whitmore. I've reviewed the temporary filings and received additional documents submitted this morning. Before we discuss asset division, I need to confirm the petitioner's legal identity. Nathan leaned slightly, exchanging a quick glance with Gerald. The judge continued. Mrs. Grace Whitmore, with documentation verified by the Colorado State Office of Asset Oversight, a supplemental birth certificate, handwriting verification, and legal documentation from the Holloway Trust, is confirmed to be Grace Eleanor Holloway, sole daughter and legal heir of the late businesswoman Eleanor Holloway. The current estimated value of assets tied to the Eleanor Legacy Holdings Trust stands at approximately $47 million US. A silence fell over the courtroom. I clearly heard the sound of papers dropping from one of Nathan's attorneys. And Nathan? He froze. His face went pale for a few seconds, then quickly folded back into a mask of artificial composure. He gave Gerald a small nod, but gripped the edge of the table with white-knuckled hands. The judge looked toward my attorney, Sophia Langley. Ms. Langley, do you have additional statements? Sophia rose, a stack of neatly clipped documents in hand. Your Honor, we submit evidence that Mr. Nathan Whitmore engaged in fraudulent conduct during the marriage, including modifying prenuptial terms without informing the petitioner, using insider information to convert separate property into marital assets, and deliberately concealing the true value of Mrs. Grace Holloway's inheritance. I had no knowledge of any of Grace's assets being valuable. Everything I did was under financial advisement and fully transparent. Sophia didn't look at him. She pulled out a small USB drive. This contains an audio recording between Mr. Whitmore and a woman named Ashley Keller, currently the petitioner's best friend, and also the person with whom Mr. Whitmore is engaged in an extramarital affair. In the recording, Mr. Whitmore clearly states he knew the actual value of the land solely owned by Mrs. Holloway, and intended to obtain it through the divorce. The judge took the drive and ordered it played through the courtroom's internal audio system. The room filled with the sound of, "Trust me, she has no clue," followed by the exact words I had heard on that rainy night weeks earlier. Nathan's expression cracked. He leaned toward Gerald, whispering urgently, but Gerald only clenched his jaw and stayed silent. The judge's voice rang clear and firm. Based on the audio recording, financial documentation, and verified legal identity, I hereby declare the prenuptial agreement between the parties null and void due to asset fraud and breach of trust. All assets derived from the estate of the late Eleanor Holloway shall remain the sole property of Mrs. Grace Holloway and are not subject to marital division. She continued. As for assets acquired during the marriage, given the confirmed fraudulent behavior, the court will defer decisions on distribution until the completion of a criminal investigation. The judge paused, eyes fixed on Nathan. Mr. Whitmore, this court is referring the entire record, including falsified documents, attempted financial manipulation, and asset tampering, to the district attorney's office for investigation. You are hereby ordered to cease all access to joint accounts, real estate, and investments until further notice. Nathan's attorney stood to object, but the judge raised her hand. This court has ruled. Any interference will be considered obstruction of investigation. I rose as the court recessed. Walking out of the courtroom, I saw Nathan turn to look at me, his eyes a tangled storm of shock, anger, and a fear he could no longer hide. I expected him to avoid me after the hearing, maybe rush back to his penthouse, call in PR, summon attorneys, or at least preserve some scrap of dignity. But as I stepped outside, sunlight poured across the stone steps and the dispersing crowd, and there he was, standing beside a silver BMW. No blazer, no tie. A man tense in the heat, face drawn and hollow. I walked past him without a word. "If you walk away, I don't know what I'll have left," Nathan called after me. I stopped, turned slowly. My gaze met his, like a mirror reflecting everything he once was, and everything he no longer could be. He stepped closer, voice hoarse. I know I messed up. I lost control. I thought, if you ever saw your real worth, you'd leave first. And I was scared of that. What's tragic, I replied quietly, is not that you feared losing me, but that you never really had me to begin with. He frowned. Grace, we had memories you can't just deny. I'm not denying them, I cut in. I'm not using them to justify being deceived, manipulated, and stripped of my autonomy. Nathan exhaled sharply, like trying to reverse a game he'd already lost. Grace, you're smarter than anyone I've ever known. I remember listening to you talk about Harriet Tubman and tearing up. I believed if you didn't belong in this world, then no one deserved to stand beside me more. And yet, I said, stepping closer, you spent 3 years convincing me I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't sharp enough, worthy enough. You made me believe I was lucky you picked me. Nathan, I added, you never loved me. You loved the idea of breaking a brave woman down and watching her forget she ever was. His face tightened. Maybe for the first time he heard what he'd done through a lens that no longer distorted the truth. So there's no saving this, he asked, voice weakening. I took a deep breath. The scent of summer wind and exhaust mingled in the air. So ordinary, yet oddly grounding. You know what, Nathan, I said. I used to think I needed your protection. I thought I was the weaker one. No money, no name, no network. I let him look at me, at the woman he once labeled the soft draft in his master plan. But I was wrong. What I needed was to learn how to protect myself from people like you. Nathan said nothing. He stood still, hands at his sides. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels against the stone steps like the final bars of a closing symphony. Behind me, I heard his voice call out one last time, hoarse. Grace, if there's another life. I didn't look back. In this life, I've learned who I am. And I owe no one a second chance because they regret getting caught. I left Denver on a misty Sunday morning. No goodbyes. No social media post. I drove my old car, the 2012 sedan Nathan once said I should replace to look like a real lawyer's wife, over 1,000 miles to Seattle. The drive was long but never heavy, winding through Idaho's bends, then the pine forests of Oregon. I felt pieces of weight lift with every curve in the road, as if the past slipped further behind me with each mile. I didn't come to Seattle to run. I came to begin again. A month later, I paused in front of an old school nestled behind a row of red brick buildings in South Park. The wooden sign was weathered, paint peeling. One side of the fence still held a yellow caution tape, a remnant of a past break-in. The school was called Bay Ridge Middle School. It had been up for sale for nearly 2 years due to budget cuts. No one wanted to invest in a place that was seen as having no future. I stood there for a long time, fingers resting on the cold iron gate. What filled my mind wasn't financial projections or renovation plans. It was the image of 12-year-old me, huddled in a corner of a classroom, quietly taking notes because no one picked me for the presentation group. It was the memory of kids labeled troublemakers who, with one person believing in them, began to change. I called Sophia, then Caleb. 2 weeks later, I officially owned the building. I renamed it Eleanor Academy, not to honor a mother who left behind millions, but to remember a woman who had been silenced and still chose to plant hope for a future she would never get to witness. I didn't reopen the school as a traditional academic institution. I wanted it to be a beginning for children who feel unseen, for women pushed into silence. In the next 3 months, I used the first round of profit from the Holloway Trust to establish the Quiet Daughters Fund, a legal and financial aid program for women trapped in financially abusive marriages. We hired lawyers, job coaches, therapists. No upscale office. Only sunlit rooms, warm chairs, and hot coffee. Some women came in too afraid to say their real names. Some had just left shelters. Some arrived with children, trembling like they were apologizing for surviving. I didn't ask too many questions. I simply handed them a file folder that read, "We've got your back. The rest, you choose." At first, there were only 3, then 5, then 12. Then I had to bring on 2 part-time attorneys and a night shift intake worker. The word spread faster than I expected. A local paper called to request an interview. They wanted to write about the mysterious heir to the Holloway empire. I declined. Then a television network pitched a documentary about the woman who survived a historic divorce and reclaimed millions. I turned that down too. They said I was missing the chance to build a brand. I gave them one sentence later printed across the front page of the Eleanor Academy website. I don't need to tell my story to be believed. I live it every day. Once a young volunteer asked me, "Do you ever regret it? Letting them take 3 years of your life?" I paused, watching the kids play ball on the newly paved court. "They didn't take 3 years," I said softly. "They only made me spend 3 years remembering who I was." The first graduation ceremony at Eleanor Academy took place on a bright, late spring morning. I stood off stage in the schoolyard, behind rows of plastic chairs the students had arranged the day before, gently gripping a creased program booklet. A breeze blew through. Lilac petals drifted across the chairs, landing on the shoulder of a mother wiping away tears as her only son walked up to receive his diploma. I listened as Lana Peterson read the closing speech, one of the first students in our transitional support program, funded by the Quiet Daughters Fund. Lana had been completely silent her first week at school. Now she stood in front of over 100 people, her voice shaky but clear. Miss Grace once told us, "There will be people who try to give you a price tag, like you're something to be valued on a shelf, but you don't have to wear their label, because only you know what you're worth." I felt my throat tighten, not because those words were about me, but because I knew Lana believed them deeply enough to speak them now in her own voice. Applause thundered as Lana finished. She bowed, hands trembling, then stepped down. I walked over, took her diploma and wrapped her in a hug, whispering, "You did so well." Lana smiled through tears. "You made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I'll never forget that." On stage, the microphone was still on. The MC, a young teacher we'd recently hired, invited me up to say a few words. I hadn't known this was coming. The crowd fell quiet. I walked slowly to the stage, no speech in hand. I simply placed my hand on the wooden podium and looked down at the faces turned up toward me. "I don't have much to say," I began, voice steady. "Just that, a year ago, when I bought this school, many people told me I was wasting time and money. That a ran-down public school couldn't become a place for hope." I glanced toward the seating area where Miss Ruth, who once fled her husband during a snowstorm and now worked part-time as our librarian, sat next to Janice, a young woman who almost dropped out of school after being forced into an arranged marriage, now studying social work. "But what I've learned," I continued, "is that no place is beyond repair if someone is willing to stay, even alone, and start again from the ruins." As I stepped down, a 13-year-old boy in a wrinkled shirt ran up to me and held out a folded piece of paper. "Read this after the ceremony. I wrote it last night but was too shy to read it in class." I took it, smiling. Scrawled across the front in blue ink was, "Miss Grace isn't like other grown-ups. She didn't just teach us stuff, she taught us how to live." I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. And for the first time in years, I felt completely full, not because I had more than anyone else, but because I no longer lived as if I was missing something. I don't know where you're listening to this story, from your morning commute, a quiet kitchen at sunrise, or sitting alone at the end of a long day. But if you've stayed with me this far, maybe somewhere inside you, there's a bit of grace too. Maybe you've been overlooked. Maybe you've been defined by someone else's gaze. Maybe you thought you had to be grateful for being chosen, even though, deep down, you knew you were worth more. So what about you? Have you ever been given a price tag? Ever had to shrink yourself just to stay? Ever forgotten your worth because someone beside you kept trying to make you doubt it? If so, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. You don't have to write much, just a few lines, to know that we're not alone on this journey of rediscovering who we are. And if this story touched something in you, follow the channel, because we'll keep telling stories like this. Stories about family, about choices, about those who once quietly endured and then rose brilliantly. Because sometimes the truest stories aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be lived in a way that's entirely your own.